What if I told you that history is not happening in dusty textbooks? It's unfolding right now, in real time, in the blazing heart of Africa. What if I told you that one man, not with tanks, not with foreign aid, not with empty promises, but armed with nothing more than raw conviction and fire in his voice, is attempting to rewrite the destiny of an entire continent? This is not a dream. This is not theory. This is happening. Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier barely in his 40s, has stood before the world and declared a vision so radical, so seismic, that it shakes the very ground of Africa's colonial inheritance. He has announced one government, one currency, one passport. Not for 2050, not for some far-off dream, but now. This is not diplomacy. This is revolution, dressed as policy. And when Traoré stood on that blood-red stage in Ouagadougou, under the sweltering West African sun, his words didn't sound like politics. They sounded like thunder rolling across the continent, from the shores of Dakar to the crowded streets of Nairobi. The world wasn't ready, but Africa was listening. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about speeches and headlines. This is a story about courage, betrayal, sabotage, and destiny. It's a story of how one soldier is shaking empires, igniting millions, and daring to redraw the map of Africa itself. The day was mercilessly hot in Ouagadougou, the kind of heat that presses against your skin like burning metal. Yet inside the heavily guarded People's Palace, the air was heavier still, not with temperature, but with electricity. Ministers, generals, advisors, every powerful figure in Burkina Faso stood waiting. The air smelled faintly of sweat, tension, and anticipation. And then he walked in. Ibrahim Traoré, not in the polished suit of a Western-backed politician, but in the rugged uniform of a soldier. A man who rose from the barracks, not from embassies. A man who had already expelled French troops, who had already cut off World Bank strings, who had already told the IMF to keep their loans. He carried no briefcase, no stack of papers, just one sheet, one paper, handwritten in black ink, 3 words only. United African Government. The room fell silent, no one breathed. And then, in that quiet voice that somehow cuts sharper than a scream, Traoré spoke. Ladies, gentlemen, this is not a request. This is a declaration. Either we unite now or we perish as pawns. Not even the old general, once trained by the French, dared to respond. Not the finance minister who still received IMF emails every week. No one spoke, because they all knew when Ibrahim Traoré said something, he meant it. Burkina Faso was no longer a satellite state. It was no longer a puppet dancing to the strings of Paris or Washington. Under Traoré, the country had already torn those strings. And now, he wasn't talking about Burkina Faso. He was talking about Africa, all of it. Some said it was madness. Some whispered it was prophecy. But something shifted that day. In the Polytechnic Institute of Ouagadougou, young engineers began sketching out a digital network that could connect 54 nations. Language scholars started working on a system that could translate 2,000 tongues. In a makeshift parliament, volunteer representatives from 6 countries sat side by side, dreaming out loud of laws that no longer bent to colonial maps. And in Traoré's office, pinned to the wall, was a hand-drawn map of Africa, not in 54 colors, but one, repainted in deep green, black, and gold, the borders erased. We no longer ask who drew the lines, he told them. We ask why we still honor them. That was the day Africa began to tremble. Word spread, not through bureaucrats but through people. In Accra, schoolchildren painted murals of a single African flag. In Dar es Salaam, fishermen refused to take foreign money, demanding instead this new dream, Afro Money. In Lagos, a song went viral, its chorus echoing from street to street. I am not a border, I am Africa. The West dismissed it as naive nationalism, but they underestimated the fire that had already been lit. Because behind it all, calmly navigating the storm, was Traoré and his secretive team, economists, Historians, soldiers, engineers. They called themselves the vanguard. Working in an underground command center beneath the capital, they studied how to dismantle centuries of division without collapsing entire economies. Safia Ouedraogo, Traoré's closest advisor, once whispered to a journalist, "He isn't planning for the next election, he's planning for the next civilization." But not everyone in Africa cheered. In Nairobi, a senior official warned, "Surrendering sovereignty will leave smaller nations in ruin." South Africa's foreign minister declared, "Without democratic consensus, this is dictatorship in disguise." And in the closed rooms of Paris and Brussels, one chilling question was asked. What if this actually works? The sabotage began almost instantly. Cyber attacks on Burkina Faso systems, disinformation campaigns flooding social media, spreading rumors of coups, international banks freezing accounts. Yet Traoré stood unshaken. In one midnight meeting, as his tired advisors worried over the attacks, he looked at them and said, "I was not raised to kneel before doubt. Let them fear, let them lie, let them sabotage. We will not stop, because this time Africa is not reacting. Africa is writing the script, and for the first time in generations, that script does not have a European narrator." And then came the Pact of Reclamation. In a secret summit deep in Mali's highlands, Traoré met with the leaders of Mali and Guinea. No media, no translators, just raw African tongues, unfiltered. Together, they signed a document that shook the earth. One government, one army, one economy, one destiny. Their words were not apologetic, they were fire. "We reject the artificial boundaries created by colonial architects. Africa belongs to no one but its people." That night, as the sun set behind the Sahel, the three presidents stood beneath a black flag stitched with a golden lion, Traoré's personal symbol of strength and defiance. By morning, the words had spread. Young men painted lions across walls in Bamako. Professors in Yaoundé read the manifesto aloud to cheering students. A retired veteran in Maputo said, "This is the Africa I fought for, not what we inherited." The backlash was immediate. France called its ambassadors for emergency meetings. The EU issued threats about illegal authority. Washington released cautious statements of concern. But Traoré did not blink. In a televised address, his eyes locked into the camera. "We are not rebelling. We are returning to ourselves, to our languages, to our destiny." His next move shook the very foundation of Africa's identity. The passport. He stood before cameras in Bamako and held up a leather-bound document, simple and proud, stamped with a golden sunburst. Across the cover, just 3 words: "I am Africa." The hall went silent, then erupted. People wept openly. On social media, the image spread like fire. A Kenyan nurse tweeted, "I've waited all my life to visit my grandmother's grave in Togo. Maybe now I can." A farmer in Burkina Faso wrote, "I have not seen my brother in Côte d'Ivoire for 20 years. What separated us? Not war, not rivers, only paper." Trains filled with families once divided by borders. Buses rolled across checkpoints where soldiers no longer stopped them. They saluted. Tears streamed as mothers embraced sons they had not seen in decades. It wasn't policy anymore. It was kinship reborn. The diaspora heard it too. In Atlanta, Georgia, thousands of African Americans filled Centennial Park, watching Traoré's speech to the African Union on a giant screen. He looked straight into the camera and said, "To my brothers and sisters in the Americas, the Caribbean, Europe, we see you. Africa is not whole without you. You do not need a visa to return. You need only the will." The crowd erupted. For the first time, it wasn't a symbolic Mother Africa speech. It was real. Passports, currency, land, citizenship. Burkina Faso's embassies across Europe and North America began processing Afro passports for diaspora families. They opened accounts in Afro Money. They even launched land grant programs in villages. It wasn't perfect, it was chaotic, but it was real. And that reality terrified the world powers. NATO's classified memos called it a soft unification threat. Western analysts admitted, this man has a plan, and worse, people are listening. And then came the greatest shock of all. The African Sovereignty Command Center. From satellites, European intelligence spotted construction near Ouagadougou. At first, they feared weapons or nukes, but what Burkina Faso built was something far more dangerous to colonial powers: independence. The ASC was a subterranean fortress, part data hub, part defense center, part policy brain. It was Africa's first intelligence command free from foreign surveillance, with its own satellite, its own secure networks, its own cyber defense. For the first time, African leaders were not whispering through wires owned by Paris or Washington. They had their own. Inside, analysts tracked currency flows, exposed bots pretending to be African citizens, uncovered bribery schemes run by multinational corporations. And then, they leaked it. Documents showing France and Britain funding sabotage, bribes to African leaders, attempts to crash Afro Money's value. The continent roared. Even doubters could no longer deny the West wasn't just watching. They were actively trying to stop Africa's unity. And through it all, Traoré never boasted. He only said quietly to his allies, "They exposed themselves. We did not win by shouting. We won by standing still while Tr.